Hi, welcome back to another episode of Energy Works. And this is Blaine talking. I have Lauren here with me. And you've maybe listened to 7 episodes with us. This is a new podcast. So this is officially our 8th episode. And we thought we'd take this episode and the next one to talk a little bit about ourselves. Some of you may know us well. Some of you may have never heard of either of us or anything in between. So this episode, we will let Lauren share a little bit about herself, and then I will take the front seat next time and do the same. So Lauren, welcome.
Hi, nice to be back here filming with you.
Lauren, I met Lauren through yoga. I'm sure that will come forth either in this episode or the next one. And Lauren has a rich and decades-long background in yoga. I have my own background, but not as long as Lauren's. She's been in, we'll just say been in yoga since way before it was cool. So Lauren, to help people get to know you a little bit, let's start with that. What drew you to yoga?
That's really funny. Way before it was cool. It's so true. So I had been traveling all over and writing. My goal was to be a writer. And so I had written a novel or 2 even. And I had come back from Central and South America where I had been living. And a friend who was living in New York City invited me to move in with her. She had this little illegal shack on the back of her house on East 4th Street in the Village. And so I moved into this shack to edit my novel. And so I was back in New York City where I had gone to university. And I had already been a ski bum out west. And so I was really a physical person. And now I'm living in New York City. And unlike Blaine, I'm not a runner. And so I needed something to do physically. So if you don't run and you don't have enough money to join a fancy gym in the city, it's really kind of not a lot that you can do. So my roommate gave me this flyer for this yoga class. And I was like, yoga? Oh my God, that's like so boring. It's for old ladies. Like, I'm not doing yoga. Like, that's kind of how it was. Or at least that was my perception of it. And so finally I was like, okay, I got to do something. So I went into this yoga studio and it was like the hipsters of New York City. It was all these actors and dancers, and it was the single most difficult physical thing that I had ever encountered in my life. It was the opposite of what I thought. And I remember that first class, I cried the whole class. Not because it was so hard, although it was, and people around me were busting into crazy moves. It was an open level class, all in Sanskrit. So this was my first time ever doing yoga. So they're like, Adho Mukha Svanasana, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. I'm like, what's the Svanasana? I'm like, what's going on? So I'd have to look around me and just watch what other people were doing and try to mimic it. And I cried because it was hard, but because it felt like I was coming home to my body, to my soul in a way that was profound and a little disturbing, to be honest, that I had never really understood or explored or even exposed myself to this part of myself that was so real. And I had been a dancer and, a ski bum and all this kind of stuff, but this was totally different. So I went back every single day. And back then, classes were an hour and 45 minutes. And I would take sometimes 2 or 3 classes a day. And this was at Jivamukti Yoga Studio with David Life and Sharon Gannon. And it was like full on hardcore, like kind of precursor to hot vinyasa flow, loud rock music, but then always a long shavasana and a long deep meditation, pranayama and chanting. Like it was the whole meal deal. So from there, I took a teacher training because I was like, I need more of this. This is all of a sudden became this major focus of my life. I need more. So I did a teacher training. I did a retreat for my teacher training, which was wonderful. And then I came back to the city and my teacher, the lead teacher, asked me to start teaching at the ashram right away. And I was like, I can't teach yoga. I just took I'd been studying for less than a year or maybe about a year at that point. And I didn't feel ready even with the training to begin teaching, especially in New York City where like, you tread lightly. You're not going to go in and call yourself a pro in anything in New York City. But he's like, no, dude. He didn't call me dude, but no, dude, you're ready. You're ready to teach. You just did this training. You were one of the best ones in the class. I want you to teach. And so I was like, well, when your, teacher asks you to do something, you do it. So I did it. And I was terrified. I think I had 4 people in my first class and my heart was like racing, and I got through it and it was great. And in those days, you didn't get paid. I got a free lunch. That was what we got at the ashram. And I did it again and again and again and again. And eventually I moved back to Montana because New York City is a super intense place, and I'm certainly now no longer a New Yorker, but even back then I was ready to have more space, more room to move. And so I moved back to Montana, and there had been one woman teaching yoga at the Bohemian Grange Hall. That's what this space was called. And it was this old building behind a business that they rented out to people for $25 a time that you rented it, and the floors were all crooked and it was drafty, but it was $25, and so what are you going to do? And so she kind of said, I'm leaving and you can have this space, and here are some students that have been studying with me, and go to town. So I made up some flyers. I literally, you guys don't remember, or some of you will remember and some of you won't, but I hand drew a flyer. I'm like teaching yoga, and I photocopied it, and I went and pinned it around town at all the places that people go and look at things. And I started teaching yoga, and I was the only game in town. And so it was great. I taught yoga. I held satsang, which were community gatherings where we would talk about sacred texts. And we created this Sangha together, this really powerful community. Sangha means community. And people were just devoted, and it was amazing. And I loved it. And one of my students was a very wealthy older gentleman, and he wanted to build a yoga studio, retreat center, all of that, and he wanted me to run that all. So that's what we spent a bunch of time doing, building this beautiful yoga studio. And then I started bringing in all these other teachers, and it was just wonderful. It was beautiful. It was powerful. I was still studying and I was teaching. I was also totally a newbie and maybe a little too big for my britches. I'm going to say that in all honesty. I mean, here I am. I'm very young, and I'm like the spiritual head of this community, and really that was kind of not great. And I remember one day this woman coming in to sit with me in a private, and she was anorexic and really struggling in her life with trauma and all this kind of stuff. And after we spoke and I gave her whatever I did, she left, and I went into the bathroom, and I wore a bindi at that point in time. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and I ripped my bindi off, and I just stared at myself and started crying. I was just like, this is beyond me. I felt like a fraud. I cannot do this. But I loved it, and I kept doing it, and I kept studying. I would go on retreats, and I would go and study with all of these amazing teachers. And concurrently with that, life is rich and challenging and difficult, and I had my own share of traumas in my life. And one of those was I had a break with the gentleman that was my business partner we had built this studio together, and he all of a sudden shifted tracks and was no longer supportive of what I was doing and kind of pulled the plug on everything. And it was an awful, horrible time. And I really didn't know what to do. I mean, he was a super rich dude and I was not. And I had been working for free basically for years building this together. And so I had all this sweat equity in it, but I had no legal standing. And he won. I lost. And I left. I left this town. I actually ended up leaving this country because I felt it was just a devastating loss. And at the same time, there were some political things going on that I just couldn't be a part of this country. So I left. I went up to Canada. And I immediately got into a relationship with this man that became this decade-long traumatic relationship. Really just awful. It was also beautiful and amazing. Obviously, I wouldn't have just gotten into something that was awful. We were kind of each other's muse, and it was a very creative and rich time together, but it was also, we were not compatible. And so, and I was traumatized by this. Before I had the ultimate trauma with him, he was killed in a very violent way. But even before then, it was trauma, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So after I lost the yoga studio, I was still practicing, but I took a break from teaching. I just thought I need to stay away from the yoga world for a time. I need to figure out who I am and what I'm doing. And I had been so distressed by what had happened in the yoga world with this, this teacher, this student of mine who kind of took over and then took everything and took all of my teachers with him. It was just really evil and ugly, and I just felt like this is not what I want. This is not yoga. This is not the spiritual path. Of course, that is the spiritual path, right? But at that point, I wasn't happy. And none of my yoga practices were helping me get back to myself. Nothing was helping me get grounded. Nothing was helping me get through any of these traumatic experiences. I was doing yoga practices, but it was just not doing anything. And I had met this yoga teacher in this new town that I had moved to in Canada who was the real deal, like a beautiful yogi. And I was so excited. Okay, I've got this teacher to study with now, because I didn't have anyone to study with on a daily basis. And I was so excited to finally just take a back seat. I was taking a break from teaching. I was going to be the student again, and I was going to learn what I had been missing in this yoga that wasn't working for me anymore. Well, within a month of me moving to this town, she got in a ski wreck and was paralyzed, which was also, a huge trauma for her. And the town was traumatized. Everyone was traumatized. It was absolutely crazy. And I'm actually going to be interviewing her quite soon. Her book just came out, Autobiography of a Paralyzed Yogi. She continued to practice throughout her paralysis, and I'm really excited for you all to hear that interview. But back then, when it first happened, it was horrific. So now I don't have a yoga teacher. Not only don't I have a yoga teacher, but she's just been paralyzed. I'm living in a foreign country where I really don't know anyone. I'm in a really abusive, horrible relationship, and my yoga isn't helping me anymore. So I'm like really struggling and lost. So what do I do? Do I leave yoga altogether? Do I try to find another yoga teacher? Do I try to find a whole other spiritual practice? What do I do? Well, just before I had moved to Canada, a dear friend came over to my house. We had a little party in my kitchen, and everyone saying goodbye, and I was giving away all my belongings, so everyone was picking what they wanted. And she said, I just was at this gathering in Colorado, and this woman came up on stage and shared this thing about energy. And she taught it to all of us, and I'm going to share it with all of you. And we're like, okay, everybody loves this friend of ours, so we're listening, sure. And she starts tapping on her body and thumping, and we're all thumping and tapping and breathing. And she's like, okay, this is called the daily energy routine. And she does this whole thing, and she's waving her hands around, she's wrapping her hands up, and she's just doing all these things, and we're following her, and we're all like, that's kind of interesting and weird, but we did it all. And she's like, how do you all feel? And we're like, actually remarkably good. What did you just do? Well, I helped you get your energy organized. And we're all like, what does that mean? What do you mean, our energy organized? Like, what? So she starts to just talk a little bit about energy, and we're all just mouth agape. Like, energy is the ability to do work. That's all we had ever known. And so we had no idea what she was talking about. But what we felt in that moment was real. And so now I'm up in Canada, and I'm with this new relationship, and he had had a traumatic brain injury when he was younger, and nobody knew what had gone on with him, and he was essentially lying on his mother's couch dying. Like, he couldn't do anything, and none of the doctors knew, and it took a long time for them to discover that he had an active bleed in his brain. and he had to have experimental brain surgery. It worked, and he lived for a while longer. But while he was there on his mother's couch dying for like 7 years, this is in his 20s, he from like 22 to 29 or something, this incredible athlete was literally just lying there dying. His mother gave him this book called Energy Medicine by the same woman that I had just been exposed to. And he said, all I would do all day long is these practices out of this book. And he said, that's the thing that kept me alive. And I was like, what? That's crazy. I'd never heard of this practice, this woman, nothing. And all of a sudden, I hear these two incredible stories kind of within, I don't know, a month or two of each other. So I'm like, okay, I need to look into this. So I went and took a workshop with Donna Eden at Omega Institute, and it was remarkable. And I remember at that point, so Donna Eden sees energy and explains what that means, what energy is, how it works in the body, that we have energy systems in the body. And I started to understand it more because some of these energy systems were ones that I had been exposed to in the yoga world. Like one of the energy systems is the chakras. Well, of course, I had studied chakras because I studied yoga and we talk about chakras. But she talked about chakras in a totally different way than I had ever learned about chakras. But it's that kind of thing. She talked about chakras. She talked about meridians. She talked about the aura that circles the whole body. And she teaches and speaks about it in a way that makes so much sense. But more than that, she shows all of these techniques that really have a profound effect on the body, and you can feel them, some of them instantly. And that first day after the lecture, I went up, and this man and I had already had, I don't know how many times we broke up while we were together, but he had said horrible things to me. The one thing he said, that I had a black heart. And so I went up to Donna, who sees energy, and I'm sobbing at this point, and I'm saying, can you see me? Is my heart black? Like I was so unsure of myself that an awful man could say something like that to me and I would believe it. I was sort of brainwashed by him. So I said to her, do I have a black heart, Donna? And she looks at me, and I hope you will all know Donna Eden at some point. We'll bring her on the podcast. We actually are bringing her on the podcast. We'll bring her on many times. She's this magical light being. And she sees energy as clear as you see the nose on your face. She sees the colors and the swirling and the directions it flows. And she sees if you've got an issue, a physical, mental, spiritual issue, she'll see that. It'll kind of jump forward and she'll see it. So I'm standing in front of her and she's looking at me and she says in her beautiful little singing voice, oh, honey, you don't have a black heart at all. Your heart is beautiful. You are such beautiful, light-filled being. Oh, beauty, you are so lovely. And I just burst into tears and she hugged me and I knew this woman was my teacher. And I started studying with her. I bought her book. I went to retreat with her in Costa Rica. I became friends with her daughters. And I just followed her everywhere she went. And when she started her certification program, I took that. I still was not teaching yoga, but I never stopped my yoga practice. And so everything I would learn from Donna, I would just put into my yoga practice because I already had, I was practicing maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours a day. And then all of these energy techniques kind of took a lot of time as well. So I was like, let me just put those into my yoga practice. And what I started to notice was like, my yoga practice is getting easier and getting better and getting more clear. And then I would look at the other side and I would say, wow, these energy techniques are working more than they are for my other compatriots in my little group there when I'm doing the yoga with them. So that's really interesting. And the other piece that was so powerful to me that I don't mean to gloss over was I started to resolve my traumas in ways that I had never imagined that it was possible. Using these energy techniques, nothing that I had ever learned in the yoga world came close to the power that these energy techniques had for mitigating these traumatic responses, not only in the moment, but I was able to start to metabolize traumas that I had had previously. And so I put these together, and eventually I moved back to the United States. And at this point now I'm living in New England, I'm living in Vermont. And my teacher says, you need to teach yoga again. And that was the last thing I wanted to do. But again, when your teacher says to do something, you do it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to teach. I'm living in this little teeny town, and all that's there, which is strange. It's a little teeny town. There's literally nothing there, but tucked away in the woods is this rather large university that you don't even really see until you kind of get onto it. And it's a military college. It's Norwich University. It's the oldest private military college in the country. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go and see if I can teach some yoga there. So I start knocking on doors, and everyone's like, no, 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 yoga, whatever, go away, no, no, no. Or, yes, we'd like it, but we don't have any money, no, no, no. And finally I got to the student union, and they were like, we have money, and we'd love you to teach some yoga. I'm like, great. So they put me on, Thursday night or whatever at 6:00, and I'm there, and like 3 people show up, and I'm like, okay, great. And I teach for a semester, and I'm like, that's it. That'll be that for me. And they're like, let's move you to a different day. We want you to come back. So then they put me on, I think, a Sunday evening or something. And they moved me into a different room. And those few students that had studied with me must have kind of seeded the field, because when I came back to teach that next semester, it was like the clown car, person after person. I mean, the class was just packed. And I started to teach them these energy techniques along with the yoga that I was doing. And the results that I was hearing from my students was beyond anything that I had ever heard from any yoga class that I had ever taught, ever, period, bar none. These students were having remarkable experiences. And it just kept happening again and again. Every student, every class, the classes just kept getting bigger. We had to turn people away. They had to give me a bigger room. They were having, their grades were going up, their sleep was going up, because these students were so stressed out. They were sleeping like 3 or 4 hours a night, and all of a sudden they're sleeping well. They're going out for, this is a military university. They're going out for special ops. One student came to me, he's like, I need to be able to swim the entire length of the pool underwater. It's like, great, let's work on this. And we did it, and he was able to do it. Like all of these things, everyone's relationships were getting better, stress levels were going down. One student, I remember this story so much. He was in a car accident, and he said that the only thing that saved him, because he didn't have a seatbelt on, he said the only thing that saved him was the yoga that I had been teaching him. He had used some of the techniques, and something, literally while the accident was happening, he was able to surrender and not fight. And because of that, his softness, he didn't get hurt. These were the kind of stories I was hearing. So I was like, okay, I kind of think this is something. This is different than any of the yoga I've ever studied before. And I need to maybe do something with this. So I wrote it all down, and I brought it to Donna, and I said, Donna, this is what I've been doing. And I think that this might be something real. And I kind of think maybe I should write a book about it, but maybe you could write it with me, because half of this, what I've been learning from you, is the potent part that's potentizing the yoga. And she read everything that I had written, and she said, oh, honey, this is so good, but this is your work. This is not mine. You need to publish this. And she gave this book to 2 different publishers of hers, and one of them picked it up and said, yes, we agree with Donna. This is important. This is real. This is powerful. Let's get this out into the world. And that was the genesis of EM Yoga. And I named it Energy Medicine Yoga in tribute to Donna, because her work is Eden Energy Medicine, and her first book is Energy Medicine, and then she has Energy Medicine for Women. And I wanted to honor her as the woman that guided me not only to my own healing, but to this powerful practice that has now helped so many people in the world heal. So I called it Energy Medicine Yoga, and I've written now 3 books, and I teach all over the world and train teachers. I have trained teachers in many countries all over the world. We have this podcast now where we share this powerful work. We have programs and a membership site where people can practice with us no matter where they live or when they're awake and when they're asleep. And so that's how it all started. And it's continuing to go and continuing to grow because it is the real deal. It is incredibly powerful work. And anytime I need something or feel bereft or feel out of sorts, there are things that I know how to do now. It's not that the path inoculates you from challenges at all, but it's that when these challenges arise, you have a really big toolkit to be able to work with them. And so I feel really grateful to have that and feel really grateful to be able to share that, because I feel at this time in the world, we need a big toolkit. We need to have a lot of techniques and support so that we can get through whatever we have to get through, and not just get through it, but to thrive and to really bring our light out into the world. And that's really my goal with this work for the world, is that each one of us can heal from our traumas. And instead of putting our traumas out into the world, we put our healed and beautiful lights out into the world.
Thank you, Lauren, for sharing all that. There's just so much. I want to pick up the toolkit thread a little bit because, yes, you studied with Donna, but your toolkit's more than just Donna's work, right? I think that you've kind of chased down several different roads around energy as you've tried to learn more and more. So can you share a little bit who your other teachers are and the other types of energy that you've studied?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm a lifelong student and I just love studying and love learning. And I always have like 6 or 8 books going at a time. And actually, a lot of the teachers that I've found through Donna. And so I've studied Bruce Lipton's work quite a lot. Probably the biggest influence that has come into my world through Donna has been Rupert Sheldrake, whose theory of morphic resonance is absolutely phenomenal. I can't say I've read all of his books. He's written quite a few, but I've read probably 7 or 8 of them. And one of his books, Science Set Free, I can't tell how many copies I've bought of that book, because I give that book to everybody. And I actually tell people if they want to study yoga, they should read that book. So this idea of morphic resonance, which is that the fields, the living space around every being. So Western science has confirmed that there is a field around every living thing. We call it the aura, and historically from time immemorial it's been called the aura, but Western science has named it the biofield. So that there are fields of information. And you know, a lot of people are like, what do you mean fields? I don't understand fields. You know, that's kind of woo-woo. That can't be real. But then I always say this. I'm going to pull this up. And I say, how does this work? This is my cell phone in my little case, my radiation case. But how does this work? How is it getting information? It's pulling it from the fields. There are waves of information that are moving through the fields. It's the same way your radio works. It's the same way it used to be how your television worked. There are fields of information. And so he talks about those fields and what they give rise to. And it's really powerful work and transformative once you understand his theories. And so I've spent a lot of time studying directly with him and reading his work. Also Nassim Haramein, who is this incredible physicist and so far beyond my ability. I try to read his white papers, but really the only words I understand are like and the. But his lectures are much more accessible, and he talks again about field theory, although he doesn't use those exact words. But his work is phenomenal and really transformational, and he really ties in a lot of the science behind spiritual practices and how that is bringing forward, and how things more and more are being confirmed by Western science. Another teacher that I love is Dr. John Douillard, who is one of the leading Ayurvedic doctors in this country. Ayurveda is the sister science to yoga, and it's Ayurveda. It literally means the science of life. And so it's all about these ancient practices. And Dr. Douillard as well is bringing the ancient practices forward and showing now the science that is confirming that these tools that have been used for 5,000 years are in fact validated now by these scientific protocols. So those are just three of the other kind of threads of people that I study with. There's just so many. I really, like I said, I'm a lifelong student and I love pulling in all of this. I study a lot of sacred geometry, the geometry of numbers and how that works in the physical body, fractal iterations of the physical body. So using that geometry to see how we are this ancient tenet of as above, so below, how that works not only mentally and spiritually, but physically, how we are the same as the clouds and the trees. And it's just really beautiful, powerful work. And it all informs how we get on the mat and how we practice energy medicine yoga and how we bring that in. You know, so much of the yoga that is practiced, and certainly a lot of what I studied or what I saw in the world happening, there's a huge emphasis on the physical body and getting stronger and getting fit and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, which is absolutely true. It happens when you practice yoga, but it's certainly not the main reason to practice yoga or even the biggest gift that you get from practicing yoga. And so the more that I bring in these other aspects that can feed into our knowledge and understanding of ourselves and how we operate in the world and how our physical bodies are just a representation of our unconscious minds and how we can work with those things. I just love it. It's so fun and powerful and exciting.
It is. I too study because I learned of these great teachers from you. So it is. It's so fascinating to read and struggle with comprehending because like you, sometimes I'm like, I get it, but kind of. I need to read it again. I need to read it next year.
Yeah. It's not the kind of stuff it's not that easy to teach. It's like you've got to learn and really steep yourself in it. And then you're kind of infused with it. But it's definitely, I mean, I don't know that I can teach quantum physics, but I have some tendrils of understanding within me of it.
Exactly. I have one more question for you before we go. So at the time of this recording, we're right at summer solstice time. So about halfway through the year. So just what's, thinking in the next 6 months here? What are you excited about? What are you working on? Like what's some fun stuff for you?
Interesting question. I didn't get a heads up on this one. Well, I mean, you know this, Blaine, and I guess everyone else, some of you all out there know this, that summer is not my favorite season. I know that it's many people's favorite season, but when the summer solstice hits, I'm like, yay, we're almost back to winter again. So for me, what I'm working on right now is really getting strong. Literally, I just said it's more than the physical body, but one of the things that I'm working on right now is getting strong in the physical body. I'm still recovering from a couple of injuries, and so I'm working really strongly on overcoming those and getting the physical form back so that I can ski as much and as hard and as long as I love and want to. But one of the things that's so fascinating about that is that there is such an emotional and spiritual component to all of these physical things that I'm dealing with. And that I know now, and so I have these other tools that I can use. So it's not just I go to PT and I, go to the gym or whatever. I'm working on all of these other things at the same time because I understand that nothing is one thing. That body, mind, and spirit, that is one thing. Body, mind, and spirit, it should almost be one word. And so what I'm working on right now is getting that really, really fine-tuned. And I'm also working on some other creative projects. But I'll say this because I feel really strongly, the summer is the most yang time of year. It's like the sun is out. I mean, where I live, I don't know, it was like 5 something this morning when it was already light out, and it's light till almost 11. So these are very long days, very yang activity, everybody's going and doing, and town is crowded with people, and everyone's playing and playing and playing and doing and doing and busy, busy, busy. And one of the things that I'm really focused on is, in order to understand how to pursue, or even what I want to pursue in terms of other creative projects, there needs to be some stillness where wisdom can drop in, intelligence can drop in, guidance can drop in. So I find myself, I'm kind of flipped from a lot of people. I'm very yang in the winter, very active out there all day long, even in the dark, in the cold. And in the summer, I'm kind of using this time to be more yin. And there is a little internal battle. Like, it's so beautiful out, but I'm actually going to stay inside, or I'm going to sit outside by the lake really quietly, and I'm not going to do very much. And I'm letting percolate these projects. So I'm doing some writing projects, I'm doing some music projects, and kind of letting them just percolate and slowly, instead of determining what they're going to be and how far I'm going to take them and what I'm going to do with them and the end game. I'm really trying to be very present moment and be in real stillness with what's emerging. And I mean, full disclosure as well, what's coming down in the next, 6 to 12 to 18 months is more and more, and we're going to hear about this in the next podcast. I'm going to tee you all up for this, but more and more, Blaine here is taking over running of the Energy Medicine Yoga Company, which I've been running with her help, and even before she came on board, with other people's help, for about, at least 10 years, maybe a little bit longer before it got formalized. And I'm turning that over to Blaine. And that's a big project to turn that over. And so I'm working on that really diligently. And I'm really excited because dun, 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 you're going to hear about that on next week's podcast, when we find out why Blaine is such an amazing, incredible person that is going to take over and lead EM Yoga into its next incarnation. So tune in next week to find out who this incredible person is and why I'm turning over my heart's creation to somebody else.
Ooh, thanks, Lauren. I look forward to, I guess, metaphorically taking the mic, and we'll do that next week. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Lauren, thank you for so genuinely sharing about yourself and your journey. I actually learned a couple of things I didn't know, and I think that it just helps everybody, all of our listeners here or watchers, if you see us on YouTube, get to know you a little better. So thank you. And everybody, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.